You guys go hard in Helsinki. I'm impressed.
Welcome to Slush. You were waiting for that moment. Dear guys,
do you need help?
Slept for like 1.5 hours in the past night, so we're gonna have an interesting discussion, right?
Let's start it right.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Welcome to Finland.
Okay.
So Chris.
Breakfast of Champions.
Breakfast of Champions, agreed. We're gonna try to start this series, right?
Let's go. What?
We're going to try to start this series.
Let's go.
Let's go. So as an early stage investor for Twitter, Uber, Kickstarter, Instagram, you're one of the most celebrated investors of our time. How do we invest like Chris Sacca?
Oh shit. So it's funny, I didn't start out to be an investor. I didn't start out to be a venture capitalist. And maybe that was one of my competitive advantages. I didn't actually think I was going to do that job. What I started out doing was just trying to be helpful wherever I could find an opportunity to be helpful. I think everybody feels their biggest and most fulfilled self when they're helping somebody. And that would turn into opportunities to invest. So Twitter was something I was just massively intrigued by. I knew Evan Williams, and I just started lurking around the office and helping out before I had any money in the deal. Later, I put some money into the deal, and it was a lot of money for me. I didn't have a big fund or anything like that, and I wasn't rich. It was actually a credit card check I wrote. So I started going to the office then because I'm like, I need this money back someday, so I need to do everything I can to help you guys. But similar stories with Uber. I think my wife and I worked on Uber for 6 months or so before we'd invested at all, and we were some of the first investors there. But that is the angle. I think it's really hard for anyone to invest successfully, you know, in a Shark Tank format almost, you know, like we just hear the pitch and we got to dive in, because so much about a company is based on not just that product, but those founders. Are those founders working well together? And then can I work with those founders well? And if we dive in, are we complementary? Am I impressed by things that they can do that I can't? And have we figured out the things that I can do that they can't and they need some help? And do they accept my help? And do I feel like we're making something awesome together? And so I think as you know, this isn't the way I've always invested, but if you look at our biggest hits, they all started with a relationship oriented around help and rolling up our sleeves and getting involved.
So you've said that you only invest when you know that you can do like a material impact in the company. What do you do in the company? How do you help and how do you create value for the founders?
Well, I traded public stocks for a while, which is devastating because, you know, when it's green, you take all the credit for it. When it's red, you can't touch it. It just goes red and you lose all your money. And I lost, you know, in the spring of 2000, I had a $16 million swing that left me $4 million in debt. And there was nothing I could do about it. And so I realized when I wanted to come back, I wanted to get into what I consider to be a rigged game, a game where I had an unfair advantage. And so what I do is I look for companies that I think are already great without me, but where I see an opportunity to make it a little bit greater. And hopefully in doing so, de-risk and increase the likelihood that I have a good exit there. That comes in the form of anything from usually just helping that company tell their own story. Often in the earliest days, you know, we've had this real transformation in startups where the business people and the MBAs were kicked out of town, and the engineers and the product people and the actual builders are running these companies. And they tend to be very technically proficient and great at building stuff and shitty at telling their own stories. And so I've worked really hard to help them find those arcs and communicate their stuff, not just to investors, but to users.
And how do you do that? Do you have any war stories from your times as an investor?
I mean, look, none of us can afford marketing budgets really. And so we have to not just build something that's easy and compelling enough for somebody to use, but we have to build something that a user can explain to another user what it is, what it does, why they should use it. And so we spend so much time trying to distill stuff down to its simplest values. One of the things I really like to do is come to one of my companies with some beers and a big projector. And we find a room that's not big enough to fit the screen of the projector. So what we do is we put the app or the website up on the projector so you can only see part of the page at a time. By only seeing part of the page at a time, you're now stuck looking at it through a new, fresh lens. And then while we're all toasting beers and looking at it, I say, defend those pixels to me. Why is that call to action there? Why does that click need to be on the front page? And everyone now who's been working on this thing and is kind of glazed over now has fresh eyes. And we fight to pull stuff out. I mean, simplicity is one of the hardest things you can do.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to make complex, messy stuff.
So when you look at founders and you are pitched so much, what do you look for them? I think here in Helsinki we've heard...
Sorry, people are shouting.
Heckling.
Shh. No, is there a disturbance in the audience? Someone lonely?
Aww.
Okay.
So I think many of us heard the Alex Bloomberg story where he tried to pitch you his startup, and now you're in the land of people who don't look you in the eyes, who mumble when they speak, and especially the Nordic countries have a hard time pitching to people. How do you like to be pitched? How should the Nordic audience pitch to you?
I think it's so funny. You guys are totally comfortable being naked with each other, but you won't actually say hi or introduce yourself. Yeah, it's incredible. We're the exact opposite way.
Yeah.
I am terrified about these sauna parties. So for a couple of things. Number one is I actually retired from the business a couple years ago. I realized that two things. One is I was losing my edge a little bit. You know, the Snapchat guys came up to me after a talk I gave once and said, we were really big admirers of you. We love your values and how you build companies, and we'd love to work with you. And this is before they'd raised money yet. And I looked at these guys and I was like, oh, I'm flattered, but I mean, the dick pics? Like, how big a company can that ever be? Fuck, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that cost me billions of dollars, literally. But when I went and told my junior partner, Matt, who's 10 years younger than I am, I just passed on Snapchat, he lost his mind. He was like, no, like so I realized, you know, I got old, I've got kids, I've made some money. Now if an app costs $4, I don't think about it. And yet most of the world is like, $4, that's bullshit. And so I found I was really losing touch with that. And so I needed to surround myself with some younger people and let them make some more of those decisions.
Like Andy Warhol.
Yeah, probably. And then the other thing I found is that when you're on this job, you say no for a living. I say no hundreds of times a day. Like my inbox is full of pitches, and some of them are for companies, some of them are for people, you know, people who want to work on our team, et cetera. And I think when I first got into this business, I approached each of them with an open mind and some optimism. But after years of data points of most of these things end up being pretty shitty, I found I was closing my mind off to everything and not actually being open to the good experiences. And so I stepped back a couple years ago to try and refresh those spirits a little bit.
So what made you go from angel investing to actually raising a fund and getting back into the game? And I've heard that Lowercase capital is 250x the return on investment right now.
We're a little better than that.
Oh.
Or a lot better than that now.
A lot better.
Well, it's weird. Even today, I struggle to think of myself as a venture capitalist sometime. Hey, who here has visited Lowercase Capital headquarters? Okay, good, because if you raise your hand, you'd be lying, because we don't have one. We've never had an office. I've never worn, you know, like the khaki pants and the blue sport coat thing. I didn't even have an assistant until really a year ago. And so I hesitated to compare myself, and I was even intimidated by the more traditional VCs on Sand Hill Road with the big organizations, and they had the logo for their firm right up on the wall in like plastic letters and stuff. I've never had any of that. But the reason I ended up becoming a venture capitalist is out of sheer frustration. As an angel investor, when something really cool came to me and I was helping these guys and we're building stuff together, I could only put in $25,000 or $50,000, and that wasn't enough to get them to stop fundraising. So as a result, I was spending my time calling all these other investors, and I was basically acting like a banker rather than a product person. And what I really wanted to be doing was building again. And so a friend of mine named Hans Wildens, Hans, is that a Finnish name? I know he's Scandinavian, Hans. Anyway, Hans helped me, he gave me a few $1 million to start a fund. And with that, when I met someone inspiring, when I met a great team, when I met some great founders, I could just say to her or him, I'm in, done, stop fundraising, let's go build some shit.
Look at the pixels.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. So you're in Finland. Do you know anything about the Finnish tech scene?
Just Nokia?
No, actually.
I mean, they made boots, right?
They make boots,
today.
yeah. These are Slush boots. Nokia, but also MySQL, also SSH, also IRC, also Linux, Git.
You know, we have a company here. We have
you do?
Next Games, yeah.
Amazing.
So it's funny. I used to be more open-minded about investing internationally, but I found that because I'm trying to play this rig game where I'm helping companies, it's harder for me to be helpful from far away. It's harder for me to be helpful many time zones away, as well as a lot of times companies come and say, look, we need new office space. And it turns out I don't know much about the real estate scene here. Or I need a CTO. In San Francisco, Los Angeles, New York, I can find you a CTO. I can't do that here. And so as a result, we found that our investments overseas tended to be randomized. That said, my partner Matt is amazing, and he knows the media and gaming space very well, and so the Next Games partnership was great because we had partners here locally, like European-based investors who were like, we can handle some of that geographic stuff, so you bring your expertise about media and gaming, and so those types of deals have made sense for us.
Gotcha. What are you most bullish about when it comes to like technology and the future of these like actual technological things?
Can I answer what I'm least bullish about right now?
Yeah, absolutely.
What I'm least bullish about is that I think we've become a monoculture. I'm 41, and so if you're my age and you studied computer science, your school program actually required that you still got a crappy summer job. You still mowed lawns or dug ditches or worked on a fishing boat. I don't know what you guys do here in the summer. Maybe waited tables. You had a tough, actual, real job. But if you're younger than me, computer science became so well endowed, and there was so much money flowing into these programs in colleges that you stopped working. And instead, all you did was go to computer camp, and maybe the biggest job you had was, the biggest job you had was maybe teaching assistant in a class or something. The curriculum also got so rigorous that there was no time for study abroad. And so what's happened is we've developed this real tech bro monoculture of people who have been exposed and been the product of a lot of privilege, but they've never actually spent time with the working poor, with anyone whose life is harder than theirs. They've never been abroad. They have no sense of the human condition. They've never relied upon anybody else for help. They've never come out of a subway station and said, holy shit, I have no idea where I am and I don't know the language and I need to rely upon the total kindness of a stranger right now. They've just never been there. And what we're seeing is the products are starting to reflect that. The products are insular. They're not based upon empathy. They're not based upon human connection. And I'm very, very worried about that.
So segueing from that into the current discussion in US with like President Donald Trump and
oh, no, whoa. He's not president yet, okay? Just stop. We have like a couple more months to pretend none of this tragedy happened.
What do you think is like, what is the responsibility and role of Silicon Valley in building products that lack empathy and insular computer science bro-ish worldview?
Yeah, well, I think first, our community has to take responsibility for the role we played in letting a completely fraudulent, fake, billionaire hate monger rise to this level of prominence. And everything we did to promote horribly fake messages. I mean, when you see Facebook both eager to censor news in China and yet openly saying, oh, we don't even know what to do about the fake news problem in America, it's bullshit. When you see Facebook releasing data saying, what happens on Facebook is people are exposed to a broader diversity of information sources than they ever would have been in their hometown. When we know the filter bubble is real, we know the algorithm really deeply reinforces channels and kind of keeps you in a tighter bubble than you ever would have experienced anywhere growing up. And so we have to acknowledge that first. I think it was weird. I was working very actively on Hillary's campaign, and it was hard to get people in Silicon Valley to care about that. Now there's deep regret across the community, I think. And Donald Trump he's not normal. This is worse. If Mitt Romney had beat Barack Obama, we'd be fine, right? He's a statesman. He believes in the rule of law. We would have been fine. I think Barack is particularly special, but we would have been fine. But Mitt Romney is actually not just horribly regressive in terms of policy,
Donald.
but he really threatens the republic. I mean, I think the true nature and the core of our democracy is at risk. He doesn't want to live in the White House. He wants to continue all of his business conflicts. It's like the full-on kleptocracy. He keeps an enemies list. He's threatened to misuse and abuse government power. He's appointing white supremacists to be his closest advisors. After all of that, lock her up, he's now putting up General Petraeus for Secretary of State, a guy who was convicted of leaking classified information. And so the hypocrisy, the institutional degradation, it really is risking what I think America stands for. And so this isn't just like, oh shit, the good guys lost. I think we're in a state of real crisis.
So what will the tech sector do?
Well, I think, I think the tech sector has to work to first acknowledge that we are making this problem worse. And we can't just be the safe harbor open platform anymore and be like, hey, look, use it for whatever you want. There's a real libertarian streak in Silicon Valley that I think is coming back to bite us on the ass right now. When I was going door to door saying, hey, look, we got to get involved, we got a campaign here, I think people were saying, well, it's not our place to be, to advocate, we should be neutral. Neutral is fine when it's the difference between Barack Obama and Mitt Romney. Neutral is not fine when it's somebody who openly advocates for racial and gender and ethnic discrimination, who wants to build a fucking wall and somehow make another country pay for it, a person who has actively threatened to censor our industry, an industry that has really, I think, taken for granted how open and free we are to innovate. And so I think he's a real threat. I mean, we depend upon immigration to fuel our companies. Our greatest talent isn't necessarily coming domestically. Some of our smartest and best and most successful founders are coming from abroad. For the United States to continue its leadership in tech, we need to be an open, attractive, and inclusive place for those people right now. I mean, the most amazing thing, right after Donald Trump was elected, when I think it was a totally bullshit election, do I feel like there's some anger and some...
Let it out.
Still, but right after he was elected, the Chinese actually stepped up and said, hey, come found your company in China. I mean, it's fucking surreal, right?
And now you're here in Finland.
Yeah, the formerly repressive Republic of China is now like, hey, we're a better place to build your company. These are weird times, friends.
Absolutely. Let's breathe in and breathe out and let you have a sip of beer before going forward. You talked a little bit about your background and how you don't have the traditional VC background. As someone who comes from the wrong coast of United States, who has a degree in law and math, what kind of advice would you give for like one of the startup entrepreneurs from here who comes from the wrong continent, who has none of that unfair advantage you mentioned before?
Well, I don't think Silicon Valley has any exclusivity on success or technology or the startup world. In fact, I think there's disadvantages there now. It's really hard to hire people there because they're very, very expensive and in demand, and it's very expensive to live there right now. Exactly. Your lens on the world is so constricted to other tech people. There's nothing else to talk about when you're in Silicon Valley. This is all we talk about. I moved out of Silicon Valley in 2007. To the mountains. I moved to a mountain home up near Lake Tahoe just to get out of that conversation and be around normal people again. And it's helped. I think it actually is a competitive advantage. So I actually think places like this have a really good shot, and it's demonstrated in Finland, of cranking out fantastic companies. Particularly once you have a couple of good ones with exits, that really provides a great foundation for mentorship, access to capital, talent, and then I actually think there are competitive advantages doing things here. You have a global perspective on the world necessarily. You can grow up in the United States and never once get a passport. Like here, it is just a way of life. You're going to speak more than one language. You're going to think about the rest of Europe. You're going to think about the former Russian republics, which will probably be the Russian republics again soon. God damn it. Sorry, we're back to Donald Trump again. But like you have perspectives on Africa and the Middle East and Asia that I think in the insular community we don't necessarily have. And so I think you have some competitive advantages here for sure.
How do you get in good trouble?
How do I get in good trouble?
Yeah.
I mean, I got an hour and a half of sleep last night. Well, I only have two speeds, like asleep or going all out.
All out.
Life is way too short to do anything else, but I seek out argument. Travis Kalanick is just one of the most opinionated people in the world. And the nature of our friendship is beating the shit out of each other. You know,
So
I mean,
I've heard that there's a Wii tennis, Wii racing anecdote. You want to extrapolate on that?
Yeah, maybe some of you guys know this story, but it was New Year's Day, like 2010 maybe. Travis was staying up at our house in the mountains, and my dad loves playing Nintendo Wii tennis. He's pretty good at it, actually. Ooh. And so he says, Travis, come on, let's play tennis. Let's play, you know. And Travis is bleary-eyed because we've been up all night for New Year's, and he says, okay, Mr. Sacca. And they start playing, and my dad is like up swinging and going for it. And Travis is just sitting on the couch, like eyes barely open, kind of doing this. And he's beating my dad, who's getting visibly frustrated. He's sweating, he's swinging hard, and he's like, what the hell? And then Travis does that like Princess Bride thing where he's like, I'm sorry, Mr. Sacca, but I'm not left-handed, you know, whoosh. And then starts playing right-handed, and he's making movements this big, just that, and he's acing my dad. My dad is like, what the hell is happening here? And Travis said, okay, Mr. Sacca, I'm sorry. And he uses the remote to page over to the global leaderboard. And Travis Kalanick, while being CEO of Uber, was ranked number 2 in the world at Wii Tennis. Who here wants to compete with a guy like that? He was also globally ranked. He was like a top 10 Angry Birds player.
Wow.
The guy's a fucking maniac, right? So anyway, I seek out people who are not normal. I seek out weird people. Like, I won't invest in anyone who's not really weird. I think you need to have some kind of imbalance to do this well.
Take notes.
And that's what's exciting. I mean, I get most excited, you know, so I'm on the show back in the United States, Shark Tank. I know everyone has their different version of it. And people ask why I agreed to do it, because the deals there probably aren't gonna make me any money or anything. But the biggest draw is if you watch that show back home, you're like, Mark Cuban, you're full of shit, right? And so I get to now go on the show, and on behalf of all of America who wants to bust his balls, I get to do it from a few chairs away. And he's wrong most of the time, and so that's like a sport for me. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Is that
You're number 2 in the
trouble?
world in busting Mark Cuban's balls.
Oh, I'm number 1, baby.
Oh, I'll do it. What advice, you're 40 right now.
41.
41, okay. What advice would you give for someone in their early 20s, living in this era, in this time of the world?
Number 1, spend less money. Mm-hmm. I think the freest you'll ever feel is when you don't owe anybody any money, when you have all these choices in the world. You know, you guys have the benefit of like,
but
I've never went bankrupt.
Exactly, so you didn't
I've lost
do it.
tons and tons of money. Well, first of all, in the United States, we have to pay a lot of money for school. So that's one of your competitive advantages. You know, I left college and then into law school. So it was 7 years of school, and I owed like $200,000. You know, and that was 20 years ago. So, so that's bad. I think it's already a competitive advantage you guys have, and you like get to go to hospitals and shit. And it's amazing. All this stuff we're about to break. All this
Baby
stuff.
care.
Did I just start talking about Donald Trump again?
Yeah, sorry.
But so I think one of the most important things a young person can do is just buy less shit, have less stuff. You're a prisoner to your things, right? And so you can pick up and travel more easily. You can have a smaller house. You can quit your job and go work in an NGO, volunteer work. You can pursue your art career if you have less shit and owe less money to fewer people. So I think that's like number 1.
What about the skill sets and role of education?
I mean, I'm a big believer in the liberal arts education. Cool. I think it's overrated, or it's underrated. I mean, in that the computer science stuff is overrated. It's great, technical skills are amazing, but what has happened, as I referred to earlier, is all the storytellers are kind of gone, and the actual understanding of our users is gone. We've lost all that sensitivity, and yet I feel like that sensitivity comes first from really knowing yourself. So I encourage people to take classes, not just in art and music, but in death and dying and philosophy and theology, these things that you'll never make money on directly. But I think one of the most important things you can do is be interesting. Like, I only really want to work with people who've not only had those crappy jobs I talked about, but are also interesting. They have stories, there's some meat to them, there's some flesh, there's something really compelling. That's who you want to be with if you're going to spend night and day building something together. That's who you want to travel with, these people with these perspectives and these stories. And so, and interestingness is not something that I think you're born with. I think it's achieved by vulnerability, by adventure, by all these things. And so I really emphasize interestingness. I think you can get it from studying, from reading, from putting yourself in uncomfortable positions. Maybe more Americans should just hang out naked in saunas. That could make them more interesting. traveling abroad, going to Ethiopia and helping dig wells, that kind of stuff I think builds a much more impressive character. So Stuart Butterfield, who runs Slack, obviously one of the most successful investments in our portfolio, an amazing company. Stuart is a liberal arts major. That dude is fucking fascinating. Like hanging out with that guy and talking about anything beyond Slack is amazing. He's Canadian and yet he's got great insights into US politics. But you just follow his snaps on Snapchat. The guy he eats well, he's checking out art, he knows music really well. He's a really interesting guy. So he becomes a magnet for talent. You want to be around Stuart. He enriches your soul. And if you look at the team of people he's recruited, superstars like April Underwood, for instance, like he's really recruited an incredibly deep bench of people because they want to have authentic and multi-dimensional relationships with him. And I think it comes through in the product too.
Absolutely. So when you think about your childhood, and this is a question as a children's book author, what are the books or the TV series or things that you feel like influenced the way you grew up as an adult, or sort of the formative experiences in your own childhood that made you into the person you are?
There's a lot of those, and I go through them every day because I've got kids now, right? So I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old, all daughters. And first of all, TV sucks, so just none of that. We didn't have it. I would watch it at other kids' houses, and I hadn't built up the immunity to it because I couldn't take my eyes off it. But that one-way, non-interactive communication sucks. So for me, I think it was my mom and dad building in me right away a sense of irreverence and a lack of respect for the formality of school. So I was encouraged to skip school for anything otherwise. Like I would enter story contests. My mom was like, well, if you're gonna write that story today, you can skip school. And she would take me to visit authors who came to town and to go to the Science Museum. So every year I missed so many days of school, I had to have a hearing to justify why I could still be enrolled.
And you took it all the way to university, I hear.
I never went to any classes. In law school, if you don't show up on the first day, your name's not on the seating chart.
Okay.
And then they can't call on you.
Okay.
So then they don't realize you're not there for any of the days. But you show up for the exam, and the professor who taught the class is not in the exam.
Okay.
So you just get all the notes, you cram, you study for the exam. So I never went to any law school classes.
There you go.
So I think teaching an irreverence for the formality, the traditional institution of education was important. Also encouraging entrepreneurship and risk taking. When I was 5, walnuts, when they come off a tree, they have a pungent skin on them that smells like ammonia. And so I would take these things, put a fork in them. They're very aromatic, and I would sell them door to door as air fresheners when I was 5. Well, I thought it was pretty cool, and people would pay me quarters, but eventually somebody would call my parents and be like, I'm about to call the cops because you have a 5-year-old walking around town with a wagon right now. But they encourage that hustle a little bit.
And how do you do that with your own kids now?
So some of you have probably seen my kids on Periscope. We do the stock report in the morning. So my 5-year-old and 3-year-old, and we started this when they were 4 and 2. They know how to read the stock charts.
Aww.
And so they let you know whether we're making money or we're losing money. And then they give pep talks to the companies that are losing money that day. We also, I think it's important that kids are business literate, even if they never go into business. I wouldn't wish my career on my kids. But I also feel like, particularly with girls, we have a culture that steers girls away from business and doesn't teach them the art of negotiation per se. And so at night when it's time to read books, whoa, a spaceship just landed. At night when it's time to read books, my girls do what they call a goshenation. We negotiate how many books we're gonna read.
Wow.
So I start at 0, they start at a gazillion billion, and then we kind of meet somewhere around 5.
Gazillion billion.
It's weird. Culturally, boys are not just encouraged down business careers, but we're rewarded for bullshitting.
And we are rewarded for perfection.
And absolutely. And we can embrace failure, we can laugh it off. We're taught to pitch from an early age because we pitch women, right? So we're there with bluster and puffing up. One of the things I found, and we love backing female founders, and we're getting rich as a result. So I think there's progressive reasons to back women, and then there's just fucking greed reasons. Turns out I like money, and the women who run our companies are kicking ass for us. There's no fucking drama in these companies. They just execute, it's been great. But I do see unique challenges to some of our female founders, and one is they're not practicing the art of bullshit. So there's a non-subtle difference between lying and bullshit. Bullshit is like, putting lipstick on a pig and bringing your best game and kind of cutting a few of the corners and not focusing on the bad stuff. And that's something we as men are often taught from a young age, right? Is we're taught to bullshit, and we've perfected that technique by then.
I think they're going to kick us off from the stage in a few seconds, but last final question. What do you believe that if only a few people agree with you on? What's your contrarian right?
Oh, this is like the Peter Thiel question, right?
Well, you went on about Donald Trump for a long time.
Peter Thiel's a monster.
Exactly.
I believe that. What do I believe that not many people do? I mean, I think I laid a few of those things out here, but I guess I just think our industry is blind to the impact, to how I think we have written human beings, our emotion, our purpose, our community, our collective humanity, and our empathy have all been written out of the algorithm. And I think that's going to cost us in the long run. It will not only help the rise of despotic leaders, but I think it's what's actually severing our connections between each other. I think technology has evolved a lot faster than our primal brains have. I think we've lost track of how important presence is. Constant notifications and buzzing, and what the impact that's actually having on our health and our lives. And so I think if we don't wake up very soon to the absolute dearth of humanity within what we're building and have that baked right into our mission, our values, our purpose, our hiring, who we brought into these companies, then we're going to lose. We're going to lose not just on the investor side, not just on the product side, but the monoculture will eat itself, and our entire planet will suffer as a result.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, and now we'll take you off to sauna.
All right. Cheers.
Cheers.